Microsoft CEO and captain of my T-ball team, Phil Spencer, recently stated that he thinks the Xbox's biggest weakness is the lack of first-party E-rated games, which for some reasons led to people further speculating that Microsoft's gonna end up buying Sega. But rather than Xbox locking Sonic games down as exclusives, I think it's far more likely that Philly Boy's statements would suggest that Banjo 3's coming to the Series X in the near future. And at the risk of sounding like a crazy full-grown man, I'd even go one step further and say that it just might be possible that the game makes its way to Nintendo platforms at some point later on as well. So make sure to sit back in your dad's forbidden chair, press the subscribe button to see unlimited games, goofs, and glory, and allow me, the world's least reputable tool man, Cameron all one word, to tell you why Banjo Kazooie's long-awaited return is imminent. Alright, so call me crazy, but I highly doubt that the Samoan bulldozer Phil Spencer would go out of his way to point a weakness for the Xbox out if he didn't have some kind of a plan to patch the hole up in the near future. And if the guy really does plan on making more E-rated first-party games, then how on earth could he look at Banjo Kazooie and just say, nah, what else you got? I mean, if you think about it for like 2 seconds, what else does Microsoft have? Like, sure, they do have some other IPs that are just collecting dust in the Rare Vault, and they could make something entirely new, but Banjo-Kazooie's easily the most popular E-rated franchise they've got, and it's not like they can only make one first-party E-rated game anyway. Plus, with all the extra hype and exposure the franchise got from being added to Smash Ultimate, Microsoft would be stupid to not capitalize and make a new game, which is why I didn't expect Nintendo to allow Banjo in the game to begin with. I mean, Banjo and Kazooie have been in Smash for a while now, and Microsoft definitely knew that they'd be added long before we ever found out, I'm sure. So you'd think that if Microsoft were making a new game, then we'd have probably heard about it by now, and yeah, that'd have been ideal, but if people have been fiending for a new game for over a decade, then why waste the potential of resurrecting a franchise that could consistently contribute to the Xbox brand by rushing a mediocre game out, when they could just take a little extra time with the game to ensure that people will want Banjos 4 and 5, and maybe even a 2D spin-off, which might sound crazy to some of you, but I think it'd have a ton of potential. I mean, it worked for Yooka-Laylee after all, and it probably took a lot less work than making a brand new 3D game. Plus, it's not like any of the same people work at Rare anymore these days anyway, and since the people who are there are preoccupied with some random pirate game, I doubt they'd actually be the ones to make Banjo 3, so I'd imagine that finding the right developer to get the job done would be another time-consuming factor that a lot of people probably aren't even considering, not to mention 2020's PBR virus throwing a monkey wrench into the development for pretty much every game in existence, and as if all these factors weren't enough to explain the absence of a new Banjo game, Phil Spencer also said that the Series X wasn't going to have any exclusives that you couldn't also play in the Xbox One for at least a few more years, and if that's the case, then it would kind of be silly to put Banjo 3 out before the exclusives started rolling in. I mean, I suppose a game like Banjo 3 really wouldn't need the extra power of the Series X, so I guess it could just be a cross-generation game, but if the idea is to get people to buy new hardware, then I'd advise against it, because I honestly believe that there's a good chunk of people out there who'd buy a brand new console just to play Banjo 3, but then again, with the Series X only being $100 more than the Xbox One, most people trying to save money would probably just buy the newer console anyway, even if it was the budget version of the new console. And look, I'm definitely not saying that Banjo 3 is a big enough game to sell millions of consoles or anything like that, since it is still fairly niche, but with all the Smash hype, I do think it'd make a difference for quite a while after the game launches, especially if it wasn't phoned in, which I don't think is going to be the case given that the game hasn't been rushed out just yet. Although I suppose it is possible that Phil Spencer really is just now realizing the lack of first-party E-rated games on the Xbox, but I just can't fathom that he'd be that reckless with a comment that buries his own product if there weren't already some kind of a plan in place to remedy the flaw. So I really do think that Banjo's been in the works for a while now, especially with how much Phil Spencer seems to think that he's got to give the people what they want and earn some cool points in the gaming community. Or, you know, at least in the Nintendo community anyway. And since he loves giving the people what they want, I think that Banjo coming to the Switch or whatever its successor ends up being is definitely a real possibility, which I would have thought was insane 5 years ago, but with Microsoft already having a few games on the Switch, along with Banjo Kazooie and Minecraft Steve being in Smash Ultimate as well, I just don't think that anything's truly impossible anymore when it comes to Minecraft and all their wildcard antics. I mean, I know I said that putting Banjo 3 in the Xbox One would hurt the Series X, so of course a Switch version would be even worse for Microsoft, but even though I think that Banjo 3 would definitely be a system seller for the Series X, I think that most people would buy a console just to play this game would do so within the first year of the game's release, and then after that, Microsoft would just be leaving money on the table to keep it off the Switch, so it'd really make more sense for them to just bring it over at that point like they did with Cuphead, as opposed to the Xbox One where they'd either have to have Banjo 3 on day one, or never at all. Don't get me wrong, I wouldn't hold my breath over a Nintendo version of Banjo 3, but if you put a cap gun up my ass and made me bet right now on whether or not we'll ever see one, then I'd say that we likely will, since the game's probably not going to be too graphically demanding or anything like that, and since Microsoft would make plenty of extra sales from people who just didn't want to buy a Series X, and even from people who already bought the Xbox version that just want the option to play the game portably, I wouldn't be too surprised if we saw Banjo on Nintendo as well. And if not, then maybe Microsoft will at least bring Rare Replay to the Switch though, since there can't be anybody buying an Xbox at this point just for that. But regardless of whether or not it comes to Nintendo, I just can't fathom that Phil Spencer would publicly state that he wants more first-party E-rated games on the Xbox and then not deliver the long-awaited Banjo 3, especially with all the extra demand from Smash Ultimate. And if you think 3D collectathons are either dead or too complicated for kids to get into these days, then just look at how successful Mario Odyssey is, which I think Banjo 3 should take a few notes from, by the way, just like how the original Banjo Kazooie took notes from Super Mario 64. But anyway, let me know what you think about the possibility of Banjo 3 coming in the near future in the comments below, and as always, I'll try my goddamnedest to respond to everybody at some point. But if you want to know why Microsoft's gonna keep making Bethesda games on the Switch as well, then check out my video on that topic while you're here. But if you'll excuse me, I've gotta go take a shit dump. Later.
So I want to say thank you to your loyalty, thank you for your support.